I know it's noon because my clock is going off right now. I have a musical clock. So welcome everyone who's here. I think we'll give it like another 15 or 30 seconds and we'll let a few more people sign on. I know there are a lot more people waiting for us to get started. So we're just going to hang tight for a minute and let my clock stop making noise too. So. Okay, my clock stopped chiming. My name is Melanie Brick. I'm the district social worker with Deep Here Schools, and I'm here with Dr. Tiffany Bourne. And Dr. Tiffany Bourne works at Bellin in East Deep Here, and she's a child psychologist. We work with her a lot as a school district. They're located right next door to us, many of our schools, and Dr. Bourne sees a lot of our students and is amazing. And a very, very, very qualified, psychologist. And we are so grateful to work with her. She has lots of good ideas all the time for our students. And we're very, very blessed to have that partnership with her. Dr. Bourne had done a presentation last week on 3 different occasions for our staff, very similar to this presentation that she'll do for parents today. And it was really well received, and the staff that heard it said, we need to do this for parents. Parents need to hear this too. So hence the invitation for all of you to join us today. So thank you for making time to join us. I do want to let you know that if you have any questions, that there's a link down at the very bottom. If you copy that link, the gg.gg, that link, you copy that and you put it into another browser tab, and you just follow that. Click on that and you can ask questions if you follow that to a new browser tab. There will be an opportunity for you to type in some questions and they will pop up on my screen, and I will let Dr. Bourne know when we have questions. There are some built-in breaks in the presentation, so we will take time to answer any questions that we have at that time. So without further ado, I'm turning it over to Dr. Tiffany Bourne.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you all for joining today on this frigid Friday that doesn't seem like it should be in May. I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to talk to you. I know this is a very challenging time for all of us, so I hope that this is helpful. Gotta be honest, it's a little weird for me talking and not being able to see your faces. So please feel free to send in those questions so that Melanie can share those with me, so we can have this be more collaborative. So our plan today is to talk about the emotional and psychological reactions to COVID-19 crisis and how the safer at home and our change in routines might be impacting you, and it might be impacting your children as well as all of those that you deal with on a daily basis. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about how you can care for yourself as a parent and as a person, and also supporting the emotional and psychological needs of your loved ones, especially your children. We'll talk a little bit about how you can help support distance learning. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for conversation and some questions and answers. As Melanie mentioned, I have some set times in here where we'll go through some questions. So feel free to send those in whenever it's convenient for you, and we'll get to those at those times. So just a general disclaimer, I'm going to be providing some general information that's based on science to the extent that we have it, but it's not intended to treat any particular individual, and it's certainly not in the context of a therapeutic relationship. So it's general information. I hope it's helpful information, but I don't know you as an individual person or your family, so the advice that I can give is limited to that. So what are the emotional and psychological reactions to this COVID-19 crisis? Well, you might be feeling like a lot of us are, that it kind of depends on the day and a time, and it might feel like others have said like a roller coaster. Like some days we're in times we feel okay, we're doing all right, and then we might have periods of time that are much more challenging, and it can go between those feeling all right and not feeling so good times, maybe more quickly than you're used to in your daily life. To different degrees, we're all dealing with isolation. So a lot of us aren't able to go into the work environment like we're used to doing. Our kids aren't able to go to school and be in that environment. We might be isolated from our friends and family members that we're used to seeing on a more regular basis, or being able to hug, and now that we have to have that physical distance, it's very challenging. There's been those major changes to our daily routines. And that's the big things, like we talked about not going into work or school, but it's also things like going through the Starbucks drive-thru on the way to go somewhere, going for a walk with a friend, being able to just drop off at something at a neighbor's house rather than feeling like you have to plan ahead so that you can keep the 6-foot distance. We're also dealing with grief, and that's grief in a number of different ways. It's grief over that loss of feelings of control. So feeling like we are in charge of our daily life and what we're going to do during the day and what's going to happen to us. We're losing that feeling of safety and security. A lot of us are feeling a lot of anxiety about the coronavirus and what's going to happen, and are we going to get sick? Are our loved ones going to get sick? We are feeling grief over the loss of important events, and this is really piling up. So losing things like birthday parties, losing things like getting to go on vacation that you've been planning for a long time. In some cases, having a wedding, or even being able to have a funeral and say goodbye in the way that we're used to our loved ones. We're also grieving the ability to plan. That's really hard for me. I'm a planner. So not being able to know when this is going to be over, when things are going to go back to a semblance of normal and what that will look like. We're grieving the loss of connection. So we're going to talk a lot today about how we can stay connected with others, even if we're distanced. It's different. And I'm the first to admit that talking and having a conversation over a virtual medium like this is not the same as in person, and it doesn't feel the same. So we're losing some of those connections and feeling grateful for that. As I mentioned, there's a great deal of anxiety, and this differs per person, but it also differs depending upon the day and the time and what's going on. But we're often feeling anxiety over getting sick ourselves, our loved ones getting sick. Are we going to be the ones that get someone sick? Or, of course, anxiety about someone that we love passing away. We're also, as a society, starting to deal with the economic upheaval and the financial concerns. What is this going to mean for our family, our society now and in the future? And that causes a lot of anxiety and emotional toll. So we're certainly going to spend time today to talk about how we can help during this time. But the main message that I hope to leave you with is that these reactions are normal and not pathological. So if you're struggling, if you're feeling like your trigger to getting irritated is a little bit shorter than it usually is, if you're feeling like you're getting sad or emotional more often than normal, if you're stressed out more often, if it's harder to sleep, I want you to know that that's normal and typical. And that's the first step. We have to know that this is a normal rate. Yes, there's things we can do to help, but it's important that we don't feel badly for feeling these feelings, because it's a normal reaction to a really extraordinary situation. And it's also really important to allow ourselves to feel these feelings. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to be upset and disappointed that we're going to miss out on our vacation, or that something we were really looking forward to isn't going to happen, or we're getting really frustrated with not being able to go to places we want to go. And also feel compassion and empathy for those who are sick and those who are taking care of those. I think a lot of times we feel badly for our emotions because we feel like other people have it worse than we do. So then we shouldn't have those feelings, and that's just not a helpful way to think. So as parents, how is this impacting you? Well, first of all, you're people first. So all of those same challenges that we just talked about are happening for you as a person, but you're also juggling the needs of your family as well as yourself. And in a lot of cases, you're likely caring for your children as well as caring for your parents. So it's that added stress of how can you be there for everyone with all the limitations that are on us during this COVID-19 crisis. You're under a lot of stress. I probably don't need to tell you that. Your work has likely changed. So that could be that you're now working at home, which is a very big change from what you're used to, especially now when you're expected to be helping your children learn while you're at home. You might be having stress over still having to go to work and the decision that you have to make every day. And are you putting your family at greater risk for doing that? You might have lost your job during this process and the safer at home order. So there's a lot of stress there. You're also responsible for supporting that distance learning, which is very challenging and not something that you're used to, not something that your kids are used to, or the educators that you're working with either. There's a lot of togetherness. I was just joking with Melanie about this prior to coming on. We've been spending a lot of time with those that we live with in our families. And as much as we love them, it's just normal for us to start getting on each other's nerves, and not having that separation from each other can be challenging. And it's likely that you feel like you're juggling an impossible number of tasks and goals. So again, if you feel that way, if you feel like you are trying the very best that you can and you're failing, I want you to know that's normal and you're not failing. And we will work together on some strategies to help today. So where do we start? The first step is compassion. So self-compassion first. We need to be able to understand our feelings and accept them. And we're going to talk about ways to do that and validating those thoughts and feelings and mantras today. but also finding some compassion for those that are around us. When we start to have that self-compassion, it's easier to have compassion for others and where they're coming from. You really need to take care of yourself and your needs. I'm going to say over and over today that you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're not taking care of your own emotional, psychological, physical needs, you're not going to be able to be there for your family in the way that you want to be. So it's not selfish to take care of yourself and to engage in self-care activities. And in fact, it's very essential that you do so. So we're going to talk about finding a structure and routine that works for you. And you'll hear me talk about structure and the importance of that a lot. And I've had some feedback from families that I work with saying, how can you expect me to put this routine in place or this structure in place when everything is so out of control in my world and I'm just doing everything I can to get through the day? And I get it. I really do. So it's finding what works for you. If that means structuring every minute of the day, excellent. If that means you're having just a basic plan, in the morning we're going to have breakfast and we're going to work on school, we're going to have lunch and mom's going to go for a walk, and then we're going to have some family time and we're going to have a nighttime routine. That's great. Whatever it is that works for you, but that structure and routine builds predictability and it helps with emotional well-being. It's also really important to have boundaries and realistic goals. So this is really not the time to be coming up with a long-term big plan that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of mental energy. It's just not feasible right now for most people to be doing work at a level that is over what they normally can give. When we're already so stressed, when our mental and physical energy is being tapped in so many different ways due to the COVID-19 crisis, we need to be okay with taking a step back and what are my goals for today? What are my goals for this week? And let's focus there rather than coming up with these long-term big plans and then feeling guilty when we're not able to meet those goals. And it's really important to schedule in self-care time. It's easy to have that be the first thing that goes when things get stressful. It's easy to say, well, I just don't have time today. My kids need to do this. I had this fight with my spouse. I just can't do it today. But those are really the times when you need it the most. So writing it in your schedule, just like you would another appointment, whether that be going for a run or taking a bubble bath or reading a book, or even if it's just 5 minutes sitting by yourself in the quiet or sitting outside when it's not so cold, could be a help. So what about our kids? Kids are experiencing all the same emotions that the adults are, but in different ways and to different degrees. Many children are experiencing worry and anxiety and fear, and they're grieving the loss of their routines and their pleasant events as well. So they're missing the structure and routine of that school day, even if it doesn't feel like they like school or that they like that routine and all the expectations. Having that structure was very helpful for them. So it's challenging to miss out on that. Kids are having less social support, so they're missing their friends and they're missing their teachers. Some are in their comfort zones. So some of the kids that I work with are doing really well, seemingly, because they don't have to go to school, which can be anxiety producing for some kids. They don't have to interact with others as much. But I really worry about what's going to come for them when it's time to go back. So I'm working with those families and how we can keep kind of pushing them forward so that we're not taking too many steps back. And some kids are in homes that are unsafe, which I certainly worry about. So we know there's been an increase in interpersonal violence. And that's, again, for all the reasons that we talked about. We're together a lot more. All of our abilities to cope are less than they usually are, which can lead to big problems. And I'm concerned about not only domestic violence, but if there's more child abuse going on. So if you are in a situation that's unsafe or has been unsafe, please know that there are still resources out there. There are always crisis center numbers to call. You can always call the police for immediate help, and know that it's okay to reach out for help. And I'd much rather have you reach out for help than be in a situation that's unsafe for you or for your children. And we know that unfortunately a chunk of our society does not have a place to safely call home. And I certainly worry about those children during this unprecedented time as well. And we know that kids with pre-existing emotional and behavioral difficulties, so kids with mental illness, kids with behavioral challenges, are generally showing more challenges during this time, which is very stressful on families, on the children, of course, but also on parents and caregivers. We also know that kids without pre-existing emotional and behavioral difficulties might be starting to show difficulties that they didn't show before. So if you're feeling like, man, what am I doing wrong? My kids are struggling. They're having more behavior problems. They're more emotional than usual. Know that that's pretty typical during this time. I'm also going to give some things to help there, but sometimes just normalizing that and knowing that you're not alone and it doesn't mean that you're a bad parent can help your feelings of what's going on. And kids are also impacted by their parents' anxiety and stress. They're very perceptive. They notice when things are different and weird and not going the way that they usually do, even if you're not talking to them about it directly. And they can pick up on adult conversations. There's been many times when I've been in sessions with families that kids that brought things up that parents did not think they heard. Just being aware of that your kids are picking up on your emotions and what you're saying and what's going on as well. So how do we talk to our kids about COVID-19 and the safer home order and everything that's happening? And I think the most important thing is that we do have those conversations, and we have an open conversation where they can bring it up at different times and you can bring it up at different times. We want to meet them where they are. So oftentimes I'll start a conversation by asking questions. So what have you heard? Why do you think we're staying home? And what are your concerns? Because then we can kind of figure out what information that they already have, what misinformation they might have, and then we can correct that and work towards moving forward. You want to use age-appropriate language. So obviously your conversation with your toddler is going to look very different than with a conversation with a teenager. And it's very child-specific as well. Some kids are very fluent in talking through their concerns and what's going on, and some aren't. You want to present as honest but positive. So it's okay to be honest that you're worried about things, and it's okay that you can say that there's a virus that some people are getting sick from, but you want to be positive about it too. But as a family, we are doing everything that we need to do to stay safe, and we're following the rules so that we can be a safe and healthy family together. Kids oftentimes do better and show more of their feelings through play than through a conversation. So maybe joining in on play and watching their play. And you might see themes of like safer at home, themes of doctors and nurses and people getting sick. And that's a really good time to see where their minds are at, but also to kind of help them deal with and cope with some of the things that are going on. It's often helpful, especially for kids who have a lot of anxiety about the coronavirus, to have check-in times during the day. So maybe at first that's a few times a day that we're gonna, in the morning, in the afternoon, and then maybe right after dinner, we're going to do a little check-in on how you're feeling and what worries that you might have. We don't want to have it be throughout the whole day. We don't want coronavirus and COVID-19 to be the thing that they're thinking about and talking about all day. And oftentimes, if they know that they're going to have this time to have a conversation or to get their worries heard, it can be helpful so that at other times of the day, can say, oh, well, I can talk to mom about that later. And then they can focus on something else rather than it being a background narrative through their mind the whole day. There have been some really wonderful social narratives and social stories that have been written. So these are stories that are geared towards children, explaining what's going on. And if you just Google social story COVID-19 or safer at home social narrative, a lot will come up that can help you have like a picture and some language to talk with your kids about what's going on. And Sesame Street also has some really great free resources. So there's a website there. It's just sesamestreet.org/caring. And they have wonderful resources about coronavirus, but also about a lot of other things that can happen in children and families' lives. So it's something to look into as well. So one thing I want to talk about is what's called the window of tolerance. And I really like this rainbow form that came up that one of the social workers put online, because it talks about where our optimal functioning is, which would be where this rainbow is. So it's at this part where we can think and we can problem solve, we can work together, we can grow, and we can learn. On the either side of the rainbow, we can't be doing that. So this is the distress. So on one side, it's might be extreme emotion, maybe a panic attack, maybe fighting, aggression, arguing. On the other side, it's the shutdown mode. So maybe slowed breathing, having that flat affect or not showing emotion, maybe even in some cases disassociating, so not being present in that moment. So what happens is if we are trying to work with someone or trying to ourselves function and we're on either side of that rainbow, it's not going to work very well. We really need to be in that rainbow piece. And as you probably know, if you've ever tried to talk with a kid who's involved in a tantrum or work through a situation with a spouse who is arguing and has lost their cool, if we try to engage in a conversation or conflict, or we try to problem solve when the other person or ourselves are behind the point where they can do that, when they're already on either side of the rainbow, it's not helping anything. Typically just makes things worse. So we need to be able to take a break and re-engage after both parties have been able to regulate. So for most people with healthy brains, that rainbow piece is pretty long. So it takes a lot to get from one side to the other when we get to that kind of fight or flight piece of the nervous system. But for brains that are dealing with emotional or behavioral challenges, for brains that have a history of trauma or neglect, this part of the rainbow is smaller to begin with. And what we know now is that for all of us, it's normal to have a smaller window of tolerance during stressful times, but this certainly is. So everyone's rainbow arch is smaller than it typically is during these times. And if you are yourself or you're working with or loving someone who already has a shorter arch, has less frustration tolerance, is easier to go to the blow up or the shutdown, their arch is even smaller right now. So that helps explain why things are so challenging right now, why it's so much easier to get irritated with one another, why something that would normally not really bother you might be bothering you more now than it is during other times. So again, the importance of having compassion during this time, having compassion for yourself and having compassion for others. And I was reading somewhere that you don't have to show up to every fight that you are invited to. So sometimes for me, I remember this rainbow when someone says something or does something that really bugs me. I'm like, well, they're probably past their point of tolerance and I can just let this go. And I don't have to show up for this argument. This is just another way of looking at the same concept. I'm a child psychologist, so I like the rainbows and sunshine emojis, but this helps us understand it as well. So here in the middle is the window of tolerance. So this is when your body's in the optimal state. You can be reasoning, but also in touch with your emotions, and you can be engaged. If you're hyper aroused, this is when you're overreactive. This is that meltdown mode. You're distressed, might have the physical aggression. If you're hypo-aroused, this might be depression, you're lethargic, you can't get out of bed, it's unmotivated, hard to do things. And so we really need to work to get back into that window of tolerance. But it's important that we don't judge ourselves or others for being out of that window of tolerance. That's not helpful. It's not helpful to me when I'm very upset for someone to tell me, just calm down. That doesn't really do much for me and it might make me more upset. And if I'm depressed and unmotivated, someone, judging me and saying, why can't you do this? Is harsh and doesn't help either. And often we're our own worst critics. And so we are the ones that are telling ourselves those things. Why can't you just do this? Why are you such a failure? And that just pushes us further into the either end of the spectrum rather than where we want to be. So knowing that it's okay to not be okay, and it's normal to be going to either end of that rainbow during this time more than you typically would, oftentimes lets us get back to where we want to be quicker than if we're engaging in self-judgment. So that brings us to a pause for questions. So Melanie, do we have any questions?
I don't see any questions yet. Again, if you follow that link, that gg.gg/ISUKI, that will, and you put that into a new browser, you can type a question. We do not have any questions yet. So,
well, we will have more opportunities. One thing that a lot of us are dealing with these days is loneliness. And the sad thing is that research tells us that Americans were pretty often lonely even prior to coronavirus and prior to the safer at home orders. About 3 out of 5 Americans felt a persistent sense of loneliness even prior to the coronavirus. And unfortunately, young people are especially likely to feel lonely. And there's a paradoxical fact that the more that we use social media, so the more that we're online, the more lonely that we feel. And that ties in with young people as well, who are often on social media even more than we are as adults. And we know that being connected to others is a fundamental human need. So we need to be connected, but we also know that being on social media can make things more challenging. So why is that? Well, one reason is that we're often comparing our real world with all the good and the bad and those ugly moments with someone else's best of the best. Their prize vacation, they met this major goal, they went out on a 12-mile run at a crazy pace. So we're comparing what we feel like is our failures to everybody else's successes. And it gives us this skewed version of everybody else. Well, they're spending all this time with friends. They have all these connections. And here I am, and I'm just must just be a loser. We know that being connected to others is important. And we know that it changes the brain in both a structural and functional way if we don't have that human connection. So it's essential that we're able to get that even when we can't be physically in place with people. And social isolation now can greater that feeling of loneliness that already was there. So not only do we have less social context because we can't be going and seeing people in person, but we're using that social media more, which I'm not just saying social media is always bad. Social media is a great way to stay connected, but it can have that paradoxical effect of making us feel more lonely. So we need to be setting limits on our social media use and doing it in a way that's healthy for us individually. And as I mentioned before, electronic means of communication don't feel the same. The sense of maybe you're doing a Zoom happy hour with your friends or family, and it feels good, it's important to do, but it feels a little different, and maybe makes you feel even a little bit more lonely at times, because that in-person connection isn't there. We don't know exactly why that is. We think that maybe they're the mirror neurons in our brain, which is the part of our brain that kind of tells us what other people are doing and helps us feel connected, might not work the same way when we're connecting over a screen versus when we're connecting in person. So we know that loneliness is a big deal. So what do we do about it? Well, we have to figure out ways to stay connected. So finding out, who are you connected with? Who are your children connected with? And how are we going to keep those connections going at this time? So finding rituals that you can connect with can help. So I know a lot of families are going to church in the parking lot, or doing a virtual sing-along, or drive-by birthday parties, or going and using chalk and drawing on their neighbors' driveways to spread a little joy. I've done some virtual game nights, which have been fun. And knowing and accepting that it's not the same as the in-person events, and being okay with that. So this is not going to be the same as my birthday party as I had planned. And it can also be really fun, and we can do something creative and different. That works a lot better than trying to recreate it completely and then just feeling disappointed when it doesn't work out the way we want it to work. Figure out how you're going to stay connected with others. So reaching out to others, especially your friends, your family. Think about those that may be even less connected, like the elderly, those that don't have as great of use of technology, and figure out ways to stay connected with them. And how can we keep our kids connected with their friends and their social context as well? One of the things that I talked to the teachers about last week was that keeping that connection between school staff and the child is likely more important than any academic lesson right now. And I've had that conversation with a lot of families too, of we want those connections to be there. And yes, academics are important. I love school. I love educators. But right now, what's more important is that our kids are feeling connected and safe and secure. And so if it's a Google Meet with their teacher where they are just kind of checking in about how things are going, that can mean a lot more to families and to kids than just a lesson about mathematics or whatever it is. So making sure that our focus is on the well-being of the whole family and the whole person rather than just on getting the academic lessons done. So this might look like setting some times in your schedule to talk and video call with others. I have in my schedule every week, I have check-ins with a few colleagues and some friends from around the country that I have in my schedule. They're important to me, and I work everything else around them. And it's important to do that even when you don't feel like it. So there's certainly days when I am exhausted, it's been a long day, and I don't feel like having that chat. And it's really tempting to just say, hey, I don't have it in me tonight. But I've never felt afterwards disappointed that I took the time. And what we know about anxiety and depression and mental illness is they can be very tricky, and they can tell us, you don't have the energy, you can't do this. They're not going to understand where you're coming from anyway. You're just going to feel worse after, so why do it? And what we know works the best is behavioral activation, putting ourselves out there, doing these things. So reaching out even when you don't feel like it can really help to fight loneliness. So sometimes having those schedules can help you follow through with that, because it can be very challenging when you're having a low point to take the time and have that energy to reach out to someone. One technique that comes from the field of DBT is what's called surfing the wave of strong emotions. And this is something that I use personally in my life, but I also teach to a lot of my older kids that I work with, as well as teenagers. So the idea here is we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get those bad emotions to go away. They feel icky, so we want them to be gone. But what happens is when we do that, well, we're either just kind of ignoring, but we know that doesn't work very well because it still stays in the back of our mind, and then we might end up blowing up at somebody and we just don't know where that came from. Or we're like constantly fighting against it. And it's just exhausting, and it just kind of takes over. So instead, what we want to do is think about a big emotion as a wave. And we want to figure out a way to surf that wave of that emotion. So we're not fighting against it. We're going with it. But waves always crash. They always come down. They always end. It doesn't go on forever. So it's always going to stop at some point. But we have to be kind of willing to go on that wave with it. So the steps here are you notice it first. Notice the emotion and label it. So you're not trying to get rid of it. You're not trying to make it better. You're just noticing it. I'm feeling very anxious. Then you check your body's reactions. So where are you feeling those emotions in your body? Is there tension in your shoulders? Is your stomach feeling upset? Is your mind pretty foggy? Then you remember that you're not your emotions, that your emotions are separate from you. So I'll often have kids envision having a glass wall between them and their feeling. So I'm here, the anxiety is there, I see it, but it's not right on top of me. And part of doing this is remembering that there are times that you have felt differently. It's very challenging to do when you're in that big emotion. When you're very angry, it's hard to remember that there are times when you're calm. When you're very anxious, it's hard to think that there's times when you feel in control and on top of the world. When you're very sad, it's hard to remember that there's times that you feel joyful. So I'll have some of my families and kids write a list of times when they felt different ways and activities that have helped them feel those feelings and that they can reference during those times so that they know, okay, I'm feeling this feeling really big right now, but I don't always feel this way. And then you accept that emotion. So you're not judging yourself or your emotions for having them. And you can validate it, saying something like, I'm feeling really anxious now, but I can deal with this and I can get through it. I've done it before. During the coronavirus, especially, it's really important to have some limits on where we're getting our information from and in what ways and for how long. Right now, information about COVID-19 is everywhere. I was talking to some parents the other day who were saying, well, my kids are just playing their video games or going on YouTube and watching things that are completely unrelated. And then the ads in between are about COVID-19. Or political ads talking about kind of one way or the other about people's feelings about safer at home, which is very challenging. And it's very difficult to put these information limits on. But we can't allow ourselves and our families to get inundated with these messages all the time. It's very important to stay informed. We have to know how to keep ourselves safe and our families safe and to know what's going on in the world. But having limits on where we're going to get that information and in what ways and for what times can be really helpful. So maybe coming up with some ideas of these are the places we're going to get our information, and then we're not going to look elsewhere because we know there's a lot of misinformation out there. These are the times we're going to look at it, and maybe we'll talk about it as a family if that's appropriate for your family. And then we're not going to look at it during other times. So on smartphones, you can turn off notifications, which I do during times of the day so that I'm not getting that constant alert of what's coming up or what someone has said about the coronavirus, because otherwise it's very hard to not look right to your phone and so to look at what's coming up there. For kids, eliminating exposure to media and adult conversations about COVID-19, because as we mentioned, kids are very perceptive. They're hearing these things. So making sure you know what they're hearing, where they're hearing it, and when, and then you can also check for understanding. I've worked with a number of kids recently who have this idea now that they can't go outside. They can't leave their home because leaving their home is going to get them sick. And they feel like if they leave their door and walk outside, they're going to get coronavirus. So having to kind of correct some of that misinformation and help them understand what really is meant by staying at home and staying safe. One thing I find very helpful all the time, but has been especially helpful during this trying time, is focusing on the things in our lives that we can control. So I'll oftentimes do this with families that I work with is we draw a circle and in the middle are those things that individual can control. And outside of that are the things that we can't control. And it's often easier to start thinking of the things that we can't control. So I can't control the weather. I certainly wish I could because I wouldn't have it be so cold today. I can't control what other people do or say. I can't control when I can go back to work. I can't control that I can't go on my vacation. And then we really shift to focusing on that center. What can I control? So I can control self-care. I can control how I react. I can control how I interact with others. I can control how I structure my day. So to the right on my screen is one that was put together for the coronavirus specifically. So the outside, again, is the things you can't control. So you can't control what others do. You can't control if others follow the rules of social distancing. You can't control when things are going to open back up. But we can control some of the things we've already talked about, like your own rules in the house about social media, your own rules in the house about where you're going to get your information from. If you choose to follow the CDC recommendations or what recommendations you're choosing to follow for your family, you can control your reactions to things and taking care of yourself and your family. So when you decided to log in today, you were probably thinking I was going to spend a lot of time talking about self-care and what you can do to help you those big emotions. And I want to do that, and that's very important. But I saved it for towards the end for a reason, because I needed you to see that it's okay to have these feelings, and that being stressed out and being worried and anxious and grieving is normal. And they're not bad feelings. It's a normal reaction to this really challenging situation. So I do want to give you ways that can help and help you have more positive emotions as well. But first, it was really important to me to impress upon that point that it's okay to be having these emotions and it's normal. So things that can help and that are under your control, sticking to that routine we talked about. So having that plan of what your day is going to look like. And sometimes it might be, what am I going to do for this next hour? And we just have to have a structure and routine for that. And that's okay. Prioritizing and having appropriate expectations for yourself and others. So coming up with what is really important right now. What are the important expectations of those important goals? And then letting some of that other stuff go for now. Getting fresh air, getting outside, it can be so helpful for your mental well-being. So even when it's cold out, maybe getting out there and bundling up and going for a little walk, or sitting outside and watching the birds, whatever it is that's helpful for you, but getting some of that fresh air can really help. Moving your body. So that could be going for walks or runs. It could be doing yoga. It could be following a fitness class online. There's a lot that are available now for free. It's not the time to kind of go from 0 to 60 and you haven't been doing any exercise and now you're going to try to run a marathon. Probably don't want to put that on your body right now. But finding something that does feel good for your body and how to move it can really be helpful for your emotional well-being as well. We already talked about reaching out and staying connected to others is so important. Eating well and staying hydrated is very important. It's very tempting to just kind of keep going to the refrigerator or to keep opening those bottles of wine, but finding some moderation there and choosing ways that you can keep your body healthy and keeping drinking water to help you feeling the best that you can, both physically and emotionally. Mindfulness practices can be very helpful. So practicing being in the present and being in this moment right now. I am working on a meditation practice. Last night, I think, was my 49th night in a row doing some meditation before bed. And gotta be honest, I still don't feel like I'm very good at it. But it's been helpful to try to find a way to kind of have some of that peace and be focused on that present moment. Grounding exercises is another way to do that, another way to be present in this moment. One that I use a lot with the families that I work with, but I also use in my personal life, is what's called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 game. The idea here is to connect to your senses. So the first thing you do is you find 5 things that you see. So like I see my telephone, I see my computer, I see my water bottle, and you find 4 things that you feel. And it's really helpful if you can really focus on what it feels like. So I feel my table and it's hard and cool. I feel the chair underneath myself and that's comfortable. I feel the floor beneath my feet. Then you want to look for 3 things that you hear, 2 things that you smell, and then I like to do 1 thing that's good about you so that the person is ending with a positive about themselves. And this can be a helpful tool to do whenever emotions are starting to kind of climb up to help get back into the moment. I have some families that are doing this before they try to start doing distance learning for the day, or before they try to get to go clean their room or whatever might cause some emotion and some stress in the family. We want to be looking for the good and what's being helpful during these times. You know, again, we're inundated with all the things that are challenging and stressful and scary, and we're hearing all of this bad news. But there's also a lot of good things that are happening. You know, our neighbors are putting in hearts in their windows to try to bring joy to us while we're walking by. There's nurses and educators out there that are doing their best to help and to be there for those that they support. There's lots of movements on social media for positivity. So there are a lot of good things that are happening out there. You know, I watched the John Krasinski Some Good News, and that brings me a lot of joy. So spending time finding the good things as well to help balance. You know, it's not saying that the negative stuff isn't there, because it is, but having more of a balance. Yes, things are challenging. Yes, things are stressful and scary. And there's also really good in this world, and spending some focus there as well. Gratitude kind of goes along with that. Finding things to be grateful for during your day. I have practiced having a gratitude journal for a few years now, and I find it very, very helpful. I just do it on my phone, but some that I know have really like fancy journals that they write in, or there's apps that you can do. Whatever it is that is a way that you can show and think about what you're grateful for that day. And this might feel kind of challenging if you're just starting it during this challenging time. But you'll find that the more you practice it, just like any skill, the easier it gets. And then things during your day will kind of pop up like, wow, I'm really thankful for that. And it can be helpful to take the moment to write it down, or even just think it or say it out loud, to show that gratitude to yourself. And it can help you notice those positive things a little bit more than just all the negative things. One thing that you could do is when you're doing your 20 seconds of washing your hands, you could just be thinking or saying something that you're grateful for during that time as well. The last two on here, I have a little asterisk by for a reason. So there's been a lot of push out there that during this time, especially if you're out of work or you're spending more time at home, you really should be coming up with a new skill or habit or learning something new, or maybe doing a side hustle or finding something that you can really push yourself at. And for some people, that might be very helpful, having something they can control, that they can work towards, and having that big goal. So that's great. But for a lot of us, that might feel like adding just a lot more undue stress and things that we just can't do right now because of the situation that we're in. So not expecting yourself to be able to or have to pick up on something new and amazing that you're going to learn or do during this time. Again, if that's helpful for you, great, but don't put that stress on yourself or your family if that's not helpful. Creativity as well. Some have been really benefiting from doing things like art, or making a blanket, or coming up with a new plan, or gardening. And if that's helpful for you, wonderful. That can be really something that brings a lot of joy and comfort and control. But again, if you're not feeling your most creative right now, it might not be the time to try to start a new project. It's important to have a self-care toolkit, and this might look different for different people. For a lot of people, this is just kind of something we have in our mind, but for some, it could actually be a physical toolkit or a physical basket of things that can help when we're having really big emotions, or to help do the self-care. So for some, this might be, a hot cup of tea or coffee. So maybe putting your favorite tea packet in a mug in your basket. It might be photos of past fun events or vacations that you can look through while you're to bring back some of those memories. It could be a coloring book, and there's some great adult coloring books out there that can really bring some peace and joy. And there's some that are just beautiful, or pictures of dogs and flowers, and then there's others that are with adult language, and that can also bring some joy and some laughter that way as well. Journaling can be really helpful for some people, and some write kind of long journal entries, and others do things like in a bullet journal where they're just providing certain information that can help. And gratitude journaling is one way to do that. Maybe having your favorite music, or having a set of your headphones there to remind yourself to listen to that music. Sometimes keeping phone numbers of your favorite people can be helpful, or people that you can reach out to that can be there for you during that time, either just to take your mind off of it, or to listen and really meet you where you're at. Sometimes seeing that written phone number can help more than having it in your phone. We always know it's there, but sometimes that visual reminder of someone that you can reach out to can be helpful. It might be having an inspirational book, or something that you can read or look at that makes you feel inspired. Or maybe running shoes. I always leave my running shoes out so that I can trip over them to try to remind myself to go for a run, and that'll make me feel better even if I don't feel like doing it in that moment. We're going to talk about distance learning soon after this, but I'm wondering if there's any questions.
We have questions. I'm so excited. The very first one was, can we put the slide of the rainbow up with the clouds again at the very end? They thought that was a really wonderful visual.
Sure.
So we'll do that at the end. Someone else wrote, I have one child, 9 years old, I would define as hyper aroused, and one 13-year-old that is hypo aroused. Do you have any examples of getting a hyper aroused to expedite her, to get her out of a tantrum safely? And then also any techniques to motivate the hypo aroused child?
Okay, good question. And it must be very challenging to have kids that are on both ends of the spectrum, maybe at the same time. For the hyper aroused, when we're getting to that kind of meltdown mode, we want to spend most of our energy and time. What can we do beforehand to keep us from getting there? Because once we're there, the brain is kind of shut down, that part of our brain that's the thinking and reasoning. And the best thing we can do is keep things safe and calm and not make things worse. But we want to do everything that we can to try to get it to not go to that point. And we'll talk about some ideas in terms of distance learning in a little bit, but things like setting them up for success. So if we know what those triggers are, we know what those things are that are likely to lead to that arousal state, how can we keep those from happening, or give him or her the tools to stay calm and have those needs met so we don't have to get to that point. But when we're in that already up there, the best thing that we can do is keep things calm, keep things safe, and then re-engage when we're out of that spot. For the other end of the spectrum, when it's kind of seems unmotivated, seems like we can't get going, it's come up with small goals. So if you're having one of those days when you're depressed and it's hard to get out of bed, maybe having the goal of we have to go and do all of this schoolwork today, and then we're supposed to go out for a run, and then we're supposed to talk on the phone to someone else is just way too much. So we're going to focus on that next step. What's one thing that we can do? Well, I can get myself to go take a shower. Great. Let's go take a shower. Excellent. Then usually we can get the momentum going and we can kind of start moving in the right direction. Having rewards and consequences, that can be helpful as well. So maybe working with the child, depending, I can't remember exactly how old, but working with the child and what are the things and how can we set up the day to help you be successful? So doing those things that are harder first, and then we get some rewards there, and then we do some more things and we get that activity that we like as well, can also be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. The next question, it was a comment just saying that 2 out of 3 of our kids had teachers call them and set up Google Meets. They both smile more after those, and they have a more carefree attitude. Both kids did not want to call or meet beforehand, but the parents made them, and they're much better for it.
Good job making your kids do things that are good for them. Nice work.
Absolutely. And then another parent said, I have a student in the Deep Pier district, but I work for another school district. Might I be able to share this presentation with coworkers or families in my district of employment?
And I think that we will be able to have this link on YouTube to be shared with anyone who it might be helpful for. Is that correct, Melanie?
Yes. Yes, the very link that you use to go and access this, the recording will be at that link too. So you could just share the links right on, or they could tune in on Monday also, if they're available at 4 o'clock on Monday. We're basically doing the same presentation all over again. So, yep. And the last comment was just very informative. Thank you. So keep it up.
Oh, good. I'm glad that it's helpful. Thank you, everybody, for your comments and questions. So I don't have to tell you as parents that supporting distance learning is really hard. It's hard to have your kids at home and to be doing everything that's expected of you in all the other areas of your life, but then also feeling like you are responsible for their educational achievement during this time. Hard for you. It's hard for your kids. You know, I've talked to a lot of kids who've told me, well, I don't understand why I'm supposed to be doing school at home. School is for school and home is for home. And that can be really tough, especially for kids who may struggle in the educational system that are used to getting a lot of one-on-one support from teachers who are well-versed in educating them in this way. And your parents, in the most cases, you're not teachers and you don't have that past educational history to be able to know the best way to support and teach your child. And we know that children act differently at home than they do at school at times. And there's been a lot of reasons for that. So the structure of the school day, depending upon how old your kid is, they have been going to school for quite some time in a lot of cases, and they're used to the expectations and how things are set up in the school. And it's just not that same way at home. The educators that we've been talking to and working with, very challenging for them too. So making sure we're still having compassion for the educators as well. Their lives have been turned upside down as well. They're now trying to figure out how to teach and to meet the individual needs of each of their children, each of their students, in a very different way than they're used to doing. So it's a challenge for everyone. So again, we start with figuring out that it's okay, that it's a challenge, and feeling okay and not like you're doing something wrong if it's hard for you at your house, because I can tell you, I've talked to very few families who feel like they've got this all down pat. Most families are very, very much struggling with getting their kids to do their work, getting the kids to do the work in a way that's efficient and effective, and keeping the stress levels down. We will talk about ways to help and support that. But again, the main message I want to send is that it's this normal. It's okay if things are a little bit different. So what do we do to help support distance learning? Well, we want to simplify and prioritize. So that came up before. So understanding that right now, underneath these pressures, doing their best work as a child, doing your best work as a parent or as a worker, the teacher doing their best work as an educator, it's unrealistic. It's unrealistic to expect that anyone is able to do their 100% what they could do under normal circumstances. So giving yourself a validating mantra. So for parents, maybe reminding yourself, I'm not homeschooling. I'm doing my best to help my kids learn during a crisis. And that language shift is really important. So it is not your job to be teaching your child right now. Your job as a parent right now is to keep your child feeling safe, secure, loved, and supported. Yes, we want you to help support them in learning as much as possible during this time, but that's not your main role. For workers, so if your work is different, you're working from home, say, I'm not working from home. I'm doing my best to work at home during a crisis. For educators, we talked to them last week about saying, I'm doing my best to support my students during an unprecedented time. Because I can tell you that the teachers of your children love your children. They miss them and they want what's best for them, and they want to help support them both academically, but also emotionally and psychologically as well. So it's very hard for them to not be face-to-face with them throughout their day as they're used to. And for everyone, giving ourselves a little bit of a break. I can't be as productive as normal because these are not normal times. I'm going to focus on what I can control and accomplish in the next 24 hours, maybe even that next 10 minutes or next hour. I'm going to let go of what I can't accomplish right now. So again, it's having those feasible goals for the specific child, specific parent, specific educator on this specific day and time under these specific circumstances. What is reasonable right now and what can we work towards? It's going to make you feel a lot better. It's going to make your child feel a lot better. And you're going to get further if you have those simpler expectations than those kind of broad expectations that can't be met. We want to have that structure. So that came up again. So again, that routine and predictability are calming during times of stress. It can be really helpful. Even if kids kind of fight back against structure, they like structure. It helps them feel calm and comfortable. But it can be helpful to kind of work together to come up with a schedule rather than just being always the adults pushing the agenda. So I was talking to one parent who did an amazing job. She made this beautiful schedule throughout the day. And the kid was just like, nah, I'm not doing that. We worked together on coming up with a schedule that worked for the kid. We compromised a little bit and gave in a little bit, and it just worked so much more smoothly. And the child feels like they have some control as well. And the parent obviously is getting things done, which needs to happen. So having choice times during that time. So times where it's like the kids' ability to choose what they want to do. And maybe some of those choice times can have electronics in them and maybe some don't. So some are, you can choose from these few things, and then some are free choice where the electronics might be the kind of big ticket item for a lot of the kids that I work with. We use the pre-MAC principle, which is basically a fancy way of saying kind of grandma's rule. So like first you eat your vegetables, then you get your cake kind of thing. Maybe first we do math, and then we get to watch a TV episode, and then we're going to do science, and then we get to play outside. And then once all of our homework's done, we get to do video games or whatever it is in your family. That's helping structure things so that it's stuff that's harder, and then we get the stuff that we like afterwards. As I mentioned before, it's your job as a parent, from my perspective, to help your child feel safe and secure and loved. And yes, to do their best with distance learning, but my first priority, and I hope that your first priority, is to help support the emotional well-being of your child during this time. Teachers and educators are pretty awesome, and the good thing about this is that everyone's kind of in the same boat. So kids are missing out on their normal educational routines right now. And I have all the faith in the world that our amazing educators are going to be ready and willing and able to meet all your kids where they are when they come back to school, hopefully in the fall. So don't put too much pressure on yourself if you feel like they're falling behind academically and educationally, and reach out to their teachers and share what's going on. I have heard so many wonderful stories of parents and teachers working together during this time and meeting each individual kid's needs. So please feel free. I can say with almost certainty that your child's teacher will be willing to work with you as well. Having some emotional checkpoints during the day. So in your schedule, maybe it's those kind of check-in times of how are we doing? And if we're starting to kind of feel like we're going to one way or the other of the rainbow, what can we do now to help so that we can stay in that rainbow or don't get to that point, rather than waiting for that blow up or that shutdown? It's typically not the kind of last thing that's causing the problem. It can be a lot of things that kind of lead up to it. Things like timers, so setting a timer for how long we're going to work on something or how long we're going to engage in a preferred activity can be helpful. Again, having those reinforcing activities throughout the day can be helpful. Working together to figure out which subjects are more challenging and how can we structure that in a way that they can get more support during that time, and figuring out what works for the individual child and the home setting. And I don't know if you can see on the slide, there's an example of a home schedule that I thought was kind of funny. It was the toddler home schedule. It's just 8 to 10 Frozen, 10 to noon Frozen 2, lunch, and then we got Frozen and Frozen 2 again in the afternoon. So the last step of supporting distance learning is support. So again, expecting more emotional and behavioral outbursts from your kids right now. It's just typical and to be expected underneath these circumstances. We can come up with a calming menu, and these are things we want to do before there are problems. So for each kid, this might look different. For a lot of the kids I work with, we have the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 game on that calming menu. We might have things like physical release, like maybe going and doing some jumping jacks. We might have what I call lemon squeezes, which are when you're squeezing your hands really tight and then letting go, which kind of progressive muscle relaxation or gets us muscle tension and relaxation in our body. So it depends on the child and what's going to work. Some deep breathing can be helpful, but finding things that are helpful to kind of help them stay in that rainbow piece. And we want to have them available before there are problems. So again, finding out when we're starting to get there and taking a break or doing these strategies before we get to that point. And remembering that the straw isn't always the thing that kind of fully broke the camel's back. It's not the whole story. There's things that happened before that have led up to making things challenging. So collaborating, problem solving together, asking your child when they're calm, when they're in that ability and they can. I've noticed that you've really been struggling when it's math time and we're really having a tough time there. What do you think's going on? And really listening and taking the time to find out your child's perspective, and then we can problem solve together so we can come up with a plan to try next math time to be easier. And as I've said over and over, we have to do this when kids are calm and when we're calm as adults. We're not perfect either, and we can get really frustrated, and it's exhausting, and you are under so much pressure and stress. So if you are kind of past your point where you can be calm and problem solve, it's just best to table it until a moment when everybody's in a place where they can problem solve together. And reminding yourself that, yes, this is a challenging time, but it's also a time of opportunity. It's a time to help kids learn to manage big feelings under stress. It's a time to help kids learn how to have those life skills. I've talked to some families that are really working on adaptive and living skills that maybe they don't have the time to do during the school day typically, but they're focusing on that now. So finding the good again and finding the positives in what's going on. So the takeaways that I hope that you got from this are, again, you can't pour from an empty cup. You need to take care of yourself, and self-care is essential, and it's not selfish. You are caring for others by caring for yourself. Not only because you are going to be a more well-regulated person, and it's always more easy and joyful to be interacting with others who are regulated, but you're also modeling self-care and self-compassion. And what I can tell you from working with kids and families is what you do matters so much more than what you say. So if you are frustrated and you take a break and you say, Mom's got to go for a run right now, I'll be back and we'll talk about this when I get back, that shows them so much more how to problem solve and deal with a situation than if you're just sitting down and trying to talk through their problem and how they should deal with it. Have appropriate expectations for yourself and others during this time. Again, self-compassion and then compassion for other people, knowing that everyone's under a stressful situation. Practice and support others in using these healthy coping strategies. And we really will get through this all together. One of the greatest things that I have found is to really chunk things, chunk the time, say, okay, I'm going to get through this week. These are my goals, rather than saying, when is this going to be over? When can we go back to normal? Because we don't know those answers. So if we can focus on today, we focus on this week, we focus on what we can control now, that can help us much more than trying to think about what things are going to look like 6 months, 8 months ago. If you need more, please feel free to reach out. Reach out to a friend or a family member. I bet you'll find that they're feeling in a very similar circumstance, and it can just be helpful to have someone else to talk to. If you have an already established therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist, reach out to them. Everyone that I know that's a provider is able to see their patients at this point through video conferencing or telephone calls. So there are ways to stay connected even when we can't be together in person. If you're not already connected to someone or your child isn't, reach out to either their primary care physician, your own primary care physician, or to insurance companies, or you can look online to get connected with someone. Finally, there's a number of resources here, some great websites and organizations that have some wonderful resources available, all free. The last thing on here is the Coronavirus Anxiety Workbook. A colleague shared that with me, and it's actually tailored towards adults. So you can use some of the things for your kids, but some of it could be helpful for you as an individual. And that's free, and that link is on there as well, which you should be able to click through. It has some great evidence-based resources on how to deal with the anxiety and worries that are prevalent right now. With that, I'll turn it over for questions and conversation.
Okay, so we had a question. My 7-year-old has historically been difficult to calm down to get to sleep. Since out of school, we can't get her to calm down and go to sleep until very late, like 11:30 p.m. or to like 1 a.m. We start bedtime between 7:30 and 8 p.m. Any suggestions?
Sleep is really, really tough. And so I empathize with you in that. And sleep is challenging because by the end of the day, you're exhausted, your child's exhausted. So I would want to know more if I was in a therapeutic relationship. Is this anxiety that's going on? Is this not wanting to be in her bed? Or what is kind of going on there? But some things that you could try are some problem solving with the child. So again, saying sleep's been really tough. What's going on? Is it that you're nervous about something? Is it that you want to stay up later? Kind of doing some problem solving there and maybe coming up with an idea together about what could help. For some families, pushing back bedtime can be a little bit helpful. So if it's been really a struggle and it's taking hours and hours and hours, maybe we don't start the process until later, hoping that the child is tired and can fall asleep easier. But that's really a tricky one that it really depends on the specific situation. There are some good resources out there. If you look at the American Psychological Association for sleep difficulties, that can be helpful. A big things that we want to do for sleep, just kind of in general, are having a routine. So having that same nighttime routine that you do, if at all possible, having the child fall asleep in their room. So even if they need a parent with them, having the parent go with the child to their room versus having the child in there and coming into the parent's room can be helpful so that they're falling asleep in the same place that they'll be waking up in. But it really depends on the situation and kind of what's going on in the family.
Okay, my clock is starting to chime again. Actually, I also just wanted to add, like, I've been doing some like meditation things with one of my children who is not easy to fall asleep at night too. And that meditation has helped to slow his mind and his brain down a little bit and kind of made for like a calmer, easier transition to sleep too. So
yes, and there's some great resources for like kid-friendly meditation, bedtime kind of stories out there that you can find on YouTube. That there's some apps. I use Headspace, but there's also Calm and Breathe. There's a lot of things out there that you can find. Thanks,
absolutely. Melanie. We use Calm as well. So there was one more comment, and it says, do you think creating a structure for the rest of the school and the summer should be kind of the same? Because when we go back to school, it could look a little different in fall too. It might not be the normal transition back to school. So would maintaining a schedule, you know, for the rest of this year and over summer be advantageous? I think if I read this correctly.
Maintaining a schedule is helpful all of the time. Now the schedule can't always look the same because we don't know what things are going to look like. So your summer might look different than the end of the school year. And then we don't know what things will look like in the fall. So it's okay that schedule changes a little bit. But having some sort of schedule and routine during the day can be helpful, even in summer. I went to an executive functioning workshop a while back, and they made the point that it's really helpful for kids to learn that every day they have to do something that they don't want to do. So whether that be a chore or homework, that kind of building that in and practicing that, because that's a life skill. You know, I don't know about you, but I always have to do something I don't want to do during my day. And practicing that and having that part of a routine throughout the summer can be really helpful too.
Absolutely. That's all I had for questions now. I do know that someone wanted the rainbow back up, that slide with the rainbow. So if we could put that back up. And if you have any other questions, I'm watching them come in. So if you have anything else you wanted to add, feel free to do so.
So it's the main rainbow slide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't see any other questions coming in.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time and attention. I know we all are very busy, so thanks for taking the time to kind of tune in, and I hope it was helpful.
Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Bourne, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We appreciate it. Have a great day.